right, everyone, welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Scirrotto from Buckingham Township PD in Pennsylvania, 38 years total in law enforcement. He rose through the ranks. He was a field training officer, patrol sergeant, detective sergeant, and now chief of police. He is also managing control tactics programs for a number of police academies. And previous to his current role, he was a part of the United States Air Force Security Force, or excuse me, Security Police Force and Department of Veterans Affairs Police in Philadelphia. Wellness is something that is a huge priority to him. And I'm really looking forward to sharing some of the things that he's doing organizationally and his philosophies on wellness. So welcome to the show, Chief Scirrotto. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. No, I'm looking forward to it. Some of the things that you're doing are really interesting. I think your philosophy, especially on physical fitness and wellness, is really interesting. And one of the things that I left out of your bio intentionally, because I want to talk about this a little bit, is you are a black belt in BJJ. So Jiu-Jitsu, talk about this a little bit. So you got that in 2017. So you've been doing this for a long time. And
Yes.
I always find it really interesting to talk to people who were doing things before they were cool. Because I feel like Jiu-Jitsu and especially the incorporation of Jiu-Jitsu and defensive tactics has been something that has just recently kind of come into the conversation. So tell us a little bit about you and your background. Tell us how you got so involved in physical fitness and wellness and BJJ.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so looking back, I actually was involved in kind of in the middle of my life. I transitioned from just being your kind of regular police officer, working the street, and like a few of our officers out there, I went through a divorce and found myself needing to get my entire life back together, both personal and professional. And so I focused on physical fitness to help me get there. So I began with running, and running became a big part of my life. I wound up running a few marathons. So I ran the Boston, I qualified and ran Boston twice. I ran Philadelphia twice. And over the years, I kind of maintained that fitness. And when you run at that kind of level, eventually, you stop making gains as you get a little bit older. And I was always a big fan of martial arts in general. And then started teaching physical fitness at the police academies. And after that, I began training in mixed martial arts. So it became kind of a little bit of an addiction of mine. So I went from my addiction of running to my addiction of weightlifting a bit. And then I transitioned to mixed martial arts. And then eventually from mixed martial arts, I kind of focused and found that I really loved the grappling arts and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So really that's kind of how that happened. It happened in like 2007 was when I picked up mixed martial arts, and I was lucky to be working on the border of Philadelphia. And so I actually was exposed to a lot of people that are in and around the UFC and things like that. I've trained a lot of big gyms and with fighters that have fought in the UFC. One of my coaches was fought for the bantamweight title, Wilson Hayes, Brazilian, and he was the black belt that taught me a lot. And then his partner was someone I taught in the police academy. His name was Jared Weiner, and he's a world-class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. He's a 5th degree black belt. And he, over the next 10 years, I trained under him. My children trained under him. And eventually he awarded me my black belt in 17, my first degree in 20, my second degree. And, so I'm still under his kind of tutelage. And it's ironic. I'm a chief in Bucks County now, and I used to be a chief of police in Montgomery County, right on the border of Philadelphia. So we had a common border with the city. Now I'm a little further out in Bucks County, a little more rural of an area, upper middle class type of an area, but a similar size police agency. So it was really easy for me to transition what I built at my last police department, which was Lower Moreland Township, and then bring a lot of those things here. The biggest challenge was applying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to law enforcement training. So it became very obvious to me. I had some experiences during my career where Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu made it much easier for me to deal with people that we needed to arrest, people that were physically resistant. Then being exposed to police academy, began teaching it to cadets and focusing on that. And if you've never done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there's very few sports, if any, that will tax you physically. So it's like a different kind of fitness. So when people get into the grappling arts like wrestling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, even if they come from a background of weightlifting or CrossFit or anything like that, they are stunned to find out how difficult it is to maintain your wind and control and the physical strength needed when you're grappling against another person. So it uniquely prepares our men and women for police work and the challenges of police work. And if you look back over that time period, the first the Garner case involving a chokehold death case, I was kind of in the academy then teaching, and I've been trying to move that ball forward for many years now. So 2014, I wrote a program for my own police department where I eventually became chief, and it was not implemented, the program I wrote. So I went to a program called Northwestern University School of Staff and Command. And that's like kind of a nationally known, there's like the FBI Academy, and then there's Northwestern. They're the like pinnacle of leadership training programs, and they're like 4 and 5 months long. So during that, you're required to find a problem within your organization and write some type of staffing analysis or program to fix it. So I did an entire program on control tactics and pitched it to my chief of police at the time and the lieutenant. And, they were like, wow, it's great, and I said, I'll always remember sitting down with my lieutenant who was my first patrol sergeant. So him and I had a great relationship, and he's like, I was like, so, LT, what do you think about this program? And he's like, oh, well, Dave, do you want me to be honest? And I was like, well, of course I want you to be honest. He says, well, it's a bit much. It's a bit much. And so if you think about it, in policing in general, that has been the struggle of getting the mentality of our leadership to embrace training that will, change, the dynamic our officers have on the street. So it has been a national struggle, and for me it's been focused mostly in Pennsylvania, although I've had the opportunity to travel to other states and train with police officers that initiated programs in other states, namely Texas, Florida. So you said it correctly. It's actually changing finally, it's really getting its own momentum. Part of it is the GST program, which is Gracie Survival Tactics. They were the first big company to box and prepare instructor programs that was heavily using grappling arts. And now there's some other companies out there doing really, really good work. One is called EFC. So it's Effective Fitness Combatives. And that's kind of like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but it's from the Gracie group came from, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu family, and then they recruited law enforcement to kind of develop their techniques. Whereas this EFC is like police officers that train Jiu-Jitsu, saw how to apply it on the street. So it's slightly different, but both of them have great value. Yeah. So that's kind of like how I got from point A to point B over the last 20 years.
There's so much that I want to dive into that you just said. So bear with me. I'm going to backtrack to the very beginning. So when you started this you said 2007 is kind of when you had, and I love that you said that you were just like kind of a regular police officer. You went through some things in your life, and then you're like, okay, I got to start focusing on myself and my own personal wellness. And what are the things that I can do to get there? And you started, one step in front of the other, started running, started doing these other things. And then you found Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in around 2007 timeframe, correct? Did I write that down correctly? Okay.
Yes, that's right. So when I started training.
When you started training, I'm really curious, when you started training this and you're like telling all your peers, like, hey guys, I'm doing this thing. It's like martial arts and I'm, rolling around and I'm grappling. Were people receptive to that at that time, or were they kind of poking fun? Like, what was the response when you started telling people, hey, I'm doing this new thing?
Yeah, so it's funny. It's very ironic. If you look at the landscape of law enforcement, a lot of the newer things that eventually become part of policing tend to start, it doesn't make me happy, but it tends to start out in California and work its way across the country. Like
Yep.
they are a lot more innovative than up here in the northeast part of the country. We're like the old guard as far as policing. And then when you butt up against one of the largest police departments in the country, Philadelphia, and the ingrained mentality there, and then the different suburban agencies, there was definitely a resistance to it. Philadelphia, they see a lot of use of force. There's, anything you can possibly imagine happens there regularly. They've had the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to, national, being part of national news. So for me, at this smaller agency on the border of Philadelphia, and started talking about it, I was kind of chuckling. You made me think about it. I can remember like getting like black eyes because when I was originally training, I was training not just grappling but mixed martial arts. So it was like kickboxing and punching, and I can remember like coming to work with black eye, and I remember the chief was all aghast at that.
Mhm.
Like, oh my god, you can't walk around here with a black eye. And I'm like, well, actually, I'm more well prepared than all of my peers to
Yeah.
handle the challenges of the street. But then eventually, over time, especially being so the two police departments that I teach for, I was just one of the instructors for years. And then eventually I took over the programs as far as I don't get any compensation for it, but I run the programs. I've selected all the instructors, and um, you can imagine the thousands of officers I've taught over the years. And I have a group of them that now train and continue to train. So I spent the last 20 years basically trying to convince all the cadets that come through the academy that like you need to, whatever your goals are in policing or whatever, you need to focus on, find a place to train some type of martial art, being understanding. I may think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the ideal um, martial art for policing, but I would just be happy if they train anywhere because there's components of every martial art that could be useful,
Mhm.
and at least learning what you can do with your own body and things like that is important to at least help them with their confidence and their bearing and lessening the likelihood of panicking, things like that.
Yeah.
So that's really been my focus all these years is like that's our sell, and I'll tell them I don't care what you train. And a lot of people came to me for advice, and I would always try to find gyms that are like local to where they live. So I would ask them like, where do you live? And then I would name gyms there. And then I'm very comfortable networking. I've never been afraid or uncomfortable like walking into a gym and saying, hey, my name's Dave. Can I train here with you all day? And so I've built like a huge network of gym owners and black belts all throughout the region that, will give discounts to the officers and encourage them. And the other aspect of that is trying to convince them to find one whose culture, because every gym kind of has its own little unique culture.
Yeah.
Trying to encourage people find the gym that works for you, that you feel comfortable, that you enjoy going to, that you find yourself getting your passion going to be there. So that's
Yeah.
kind of been my focus over the years as far as that goes. Did I answer the question?
You did. And I think it's really interesting because I feel like everything that we're seeing now in the wellness space was something that 10, 15 years ago, everyone laughed at and said, like, this will never be a part of our culture or like what's going on, and now it's very much a part of the conversation and it's being implemented. And so I had the same experience when I first started in this wellness space, and that was only like 8, 9 years ago. I had people coming up to me being like, hey, and they meant it really nicely. Like, I want to preface the fact that I don't think anyone was trying to be mean to me, but they were just like, cops don't do this. Like, this will never be a part of our culture. But, like, I guess if you want to come in and volunteer your time and like do it for free, like I guess we won't say no. And now these things are ingrained with almost every wellness agency across the country, or at least they're starting to become a part of the conversation. And so I think it's really interesting that, back when you started, maybe these things weren't as well received. People are like, martial arts, what? Like, what is going on? And you believed in it so much that you were willing to continue the conversation and create policies and training manuals and talk to people. And now, almost 20 years later,
Mhm.
like now it's a thing, and so I think it's a good reminder that things take time. And if you believe in something and you think that it's going to help people, that the pursuit of implementation of these things is worthwhile, but also understanding that people might laugh in your face along the way. There might be hurdles along the way. You might have to climb a really, really tall mountain that takes you 15 years, 20 years, to get there. But if you believe in it and, you have people who slowly start to build that receptiveness to it, it'll become successful. And I want to circle back to the results. You mentioned these a couple times. So when we look at ROI, we take a look at return on investment, right? And I think a lot of times we think of dollars, which of course, like you want to know, like if I put $5 in, am I going to get five or more dollars back? And we can relate it that way. But I think that sometimes when we think of return on investment, we have to think about what is the return on investment on our time and our energy and the things that we're doing. And so you invested your time into taking care of yourself and into training and getting a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You also invested your time into training other people and trying to set them up for success with, building that network of trainers in your area. Can you kind of bullet point what are some of the results that you have seen as a return on that investment? And you said you're better equipped in the streets, you're able to handle certain situations. So, what are some of those results that you have seen?
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind, the number one is, positive outcomes when it comes to use of force.
Mhm.
So, like, first off, there's beyond doubt that those police departments that have implemented these trainings, those officers that make it part of their lives, they have without a doubt saved lives, whether it's partners' lives, whether it's citizens' lives, because the ability to understand how to control the human body. A lot of my focus, and this is an area where we diverge, is the old school police kind of techniques involved, striking to gain compliance, pain compliance, things like that. And, those things, and then the advent of video cameras. So everything's on camera. So then it creates, because use of force very rarely looks good, right?
Right.
And then when we start hitting on people and beating on people, trying to gain compliance, a lot of that's fear driven because officers don't know what they're doing. They are fearful for themselves and others. There's anxiety involved because they don't know what they're doing. And so the first return is, saving of lives and having better outcomes, and protecting agencies from liability would be a second one. Um, um, so those parts, as we're talking about wellness, the aspect of there's programs out there that you've seen when it comes to wellness and PTSD and things like that physical training like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu can be extremely therapeutic. So
Yeah.
that's an area that, like, the military, people that have been through combat will embrace that type of training, just like whether it's swim training. I work with a foundation out here outside of Philadelphia called the Kindle Hill Foundation, which is equine therapy.
Mm.
And they do a lot of PTSD work and wellness work. And so, like, this past year, we created I shouldn't say we created, the agency I left actually beat me to it by a few months, but when I came here to Buckingham, we did our first mandatory DTAC training at this Kindle Hill Foundation. So the owner of this foundation, it's a charitable foundation, has equine assisted, PTSD therapy and wellness programs, de-escalation training, interacting with a horse. So
Mhm.
if you can get, a 1,500-pound animal to do what you want without physically doing it, so they have that aspect. So we combined our control tactics, our mandatory control tactics block with that program. So we did is we hosted it there. They built a dojo. The owner found out about the value of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu just both for therapy, but also de-escalation and control tactics. So she built a dojo on site. So, we pay a fee, we go there, we run our control tactics training for my whole police department over 2 days there. And then we have the group there. We split it in two groups, and half does the equine therapy while half does the control tactics training. Then they switch, and so that was like very innovative program. And I mean, I got great, incredible like reviews from all the officers here. And what's a little different here than where I came from is over my last 6 or 7 years at Lower Moreland Township Police Department, I recruited people that actually trained. So by the time I left there, I had like 5 instructors that were all competent practitioners in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and ran the control tactics program. And then when I came to my new agency, I really didn't have anyone. I have a couple people that have, some basic skills, and then I've been trying to build them up and also trying to recruit at the same time. So it's slightly different that way, but the return on investment again for the agency is liabilities, injuries to people, injuries to our officers, all that. And that's kind of the rub with police agencies and the resistance over the years is most places tried to implement some very minimal control tactics trainings for years and years, but they were using kind of the antiquated programs that are out there, and they weren't jujitsu based, they weren't grappling arts based. They involve striking and various techniques like that are far less effective and tend to create. Have you ever heard of the red man suit? Have you ever heard that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like the red man suit, you'll see police departments, they'll put a person in this big, puffy, padded suit, and then they're basically like using all these different strikes to like try to disable this person. Well, those when they don't train that often, and then you're implementing that type of training, you tend to get officers hurt in the training room.
Mm.
And every time that happens, the agency pulls back from implementing any type of live physical training. So that's kind of been the challenge for control tactics and actual training. The other part is, most states just never put like like Pennsylvania wasn't until I was on the committee and we wrote it 2021. So I was a police officer in Pennsylvania from 1992 to 2020. Obviously I'm currently still, but until 2021 was the first time that there was ever a mandatory control tactics training from all police departments. And they have to do it a 1 4-hour block once a year.
Mm-hmm.
So then whenever I teach, I always, I'll reach out to my audience and I'll say, who in here is good at golf, and you always get 5 or 6 people that love golf. So then I put them on the spot and I say, if you were only allowed to train 1 round of golf once a year, how good would you be at golf? No driving, no putting, no chip and wedge, none of those things. How good would you be? And they all admit, I would be terrible. I wouldn't have whatever I don't golf, so whatever the lingo is, the handicap.
That was good. I was like, this guy's a golfer. That was really good.
Yeah, I got them all fooled. But anyway, when you put it to the people in that way, they're like, you see the light bulb go off. Like, yeah, we're expecting our officers to physically control people that are resistant in mental crisis, high on drugs, violent in domestic situations. And we're saying our preparation for you is whatever you got in the academy, however many years ago. And then once a year now, after 20 some years or 30 years almost, you get 4 hours once a year.
Yeah.
So when you think about that, and in my time from 1992 until 2001, there was like, it was when Taser came into be. Like 1 year, we did like a combined training where we had like the Taser, and we used some control tactics and things, and that was it in all those years.
Yeah.
So that's always kind of, and then we can't understand why our officers are hurting people and our officers are getting hurt on the street.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for that. And that was kind of honestly my next question is one, like, how do you get buy-in from leadership to implement these things? And is it possible for an agency to have continued mandatory training or no, and so I would love your insight on what you're doing and how you're able to implement that. I'm sure there's a lot of leadership who are listening to this saying, yeah, like we see the value. We want to do this. We want to keep our people safe. We don't want preventable injuries. But how can we realistically implement these things on a consistent basis so that our people are prepared?
yeah, it's a great question. So my goal when I finally was in a position as a chief to implement a program with no one holding me back, no one preventing me from implementing it. I basically took that program that I wrote in 2014 and I implemented it in 2019.
So the one
And
that they said this is too much,
too much,
you're
yes.
like, I'm taking it and I'm going to do it.
Yes. So
Okay.
in Pennsylvania, a lot of places in Pennsylvania, we work 12-hour shifts. So, it's not what's best for policing, I would argue, but the way it manages itself, that you can like basically provide training opportunities twice a month, and you can offer that to basically your entire agency if you're on that schedule, because
Mhm.
you can schedule it on a Tuesday or a Thursday, and then you do it 2 weeks in a row, and everyone is at least off a day that day, half of the department 1 week, half of the department the other week, and not coming off a midnight shift. So it works out. Whereas if you do a Tuesday or Thursday once a week or once every 2 weeks, twice 2 weeks in a row, you can provide like a training opportunity for everyone.
Mhm.
Um, so the way that I tried to implement it was, basically we rolled out a monthly program where it's voluntary. So I was thinking about what you said, and you ask any chief that's watching this, they'll think about their wide array of officers they have. Young, motivated people, athletic people, the middle of the career people, people with physical capability issues or not, and then the older senior officers that are getting later towards the end of their career with different physical challenges maybe that have popped up over the years. And when they take a look at that and they think about, how would you implement this, to every officer, it's very unrealistic to think that you're going to get 100% of police officers to be willing to train at a level that they can basically have that, return on investment. So in a perfect world, if early on in their career coming out of the academy, all officers were trained to what's called a blue belt level in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So it's white, blue, purple, brown, black, right? So those are the belt levels. So basically that first tier after white belt, and it takes like about 2 years to get to that level. If every cop in the country was a blue belt level, like we would have virtually hardly any. They could basically handle 99% of the population,
Mhm.
especially when you add into that like team arrest tactics. So train people with team arrest tactics, and you would virtually eliminate, physical cases where things spiral out of control. You'd still have the occasional weapon-based issues, and then obviously firearms type of scenarios, but any just hand-to-hand combat situations would be virtually eliminated. So that would be a perfect world. But we don't live in a perfect world. We live in the world we live in. So I've kind of adopted this mentality of what my goal is to have some segment, 20% of your agency that is like highly functioning, people that actively train, have attained that blue belt level or higher, like realistically, you could maybe get like 20% of your agency. So for an agency of, 100 people, that'd be 20 officers. For an agency of 25, it would be, maybe 4 or 5, something like that. So that was there's so basically in the way I've implemented it here in my last agency is I have that small core group that's competent, like extremely competent. Then the main bulk of your agency is basically that middle tier where with voluntary regular training on a monthly basis where you're teaching simple skills and then incorporating team arrest techniques, you employ those two things together. Now you have 20%, 15% high level. Then you have like 60% like competent in physical skills to arrest people, which you can achieve. And then from there, your last percentage will be maybe those senior officers that are tail end of their career, people, with maybe weight issues, whatever the challenges are in policing. That group, you basically give them at the mandatory. They basically will only show up to the mandatory, right? So those crew, you kind of give like some very simple understanding of simple techniques that maybe help them, but at least prevents them from being a problem in the arrest process. So then you create this environment in your agency where you have, super skilled people. Then you have all these competent people. Then you have people that are not contributing to make it more difficult because they have some basic skills that they can rely upon. And when I describe that as team techniques, we involve, there's really only several things you got to deal with, right? You need to secure the legs so that they're not able to get up. You need an officer on each arm and then some type of upper body control, whether it's pressure control on the torso. There's techniques where you hold someone's head so that they can't stand up, things like that. So imagine a world where you had everyone kind of understanding those principles. And then 60% of the people know when I get a hold of an arm, I just hang on to this and it can't hurt me anymore. And then 20% of people that are actually able to control people, give guidance, talk each other through things. And so that's kind of more realistic. Yeah. So what I would tell the chiefs out there thinking about implementing a significant program is what I've done it through is like incentive based. And, a lot of our younger people, not only are they open to officer wellness and PTSD and peer support, they're also open to learning skills like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu based skills. So it's an interesting, something interesting that I've found to be true. And just like you did. So they are more open-minded, this newer generation coming through. Yeah. So by offering them incentive-based programs, what I've done is they get compensated. So that's the first issue is they have to be on the clock in order to be training. Now, some agencies will let them sign waivers and off duty and provide training. But then if they get injured in training, which can happen, they're not covered by the agency. So that's kind of to me, that's kind of like not the best way to do it, So focus on having safe training and then incentivizing it. So our officers get compensatory time. So they get matching time to take off at another later time. The second part that I did was I matched that time with on-duty workout time because we had a gym at my last police department. Now, I don't have that where I'm at now, but it's something that, eventually I'd like to get to. Mm-hmm. So basically, like if an officer would come, they would train for 2 hours a month, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with the department. We'd match that 2 hours for them to work out at our fitness facility. So they literally, if they went, for 4 hours every month, they could basically train like 8 hours of working out a month, every month, plus getting 4 hours of control tactics training every month. And that was kind of the way we implement it. And then the last part is, what do you think a male officer would find incredibly appealing to make them get out of their comfort zone and show up once a month to training? Any guesses?
I have some in my head, but I'll let you be the one to say it.
All right. Well, so the reason I wear this facial hair here is the change in society. Like prior to, 15 years ago, it was very uncommon to see a police officer
Yeah.
with any facial hair. So what I've authorized is if they attend their control tactics training once a month, they get to maintain a beard and mustache.
That's
That's
really
the only way.
interesting. That is so interesting. I've never heard anyone incentivize facial hair.
Yep. And here's the proof. And the last thing I wanted to say as we started this question was, the biggest thing that I can tell you about to help any chief here that has doubts is the proof is in the pudding, right? So I ran a program for a 27 person police department on the border of Philadelphia for 5.5 years. And I had no officer lose any significant amount of time for injuries.
Wow.
And since I've left there a year and a half, so now they're at 7 years of this monthly program, they've had one broken finger in 7 years. So if you compare that to that, then I'll tell you even further, there is like 6 or 7 officers at the other agency who would never show up regularly on the mats, because the one thing that police officers, the one challenge with officers that I think is similarly tied to control tactics, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training, and also officer wellness is officers' ego, this opening themselves up to allow themselves to show their weakness,
Yeah.
whether it's emotionally or physically. It's the same thing. And for police officers, they have this shell that they maintain that they need to use to protect themselves and to give them confidence on the street. That's completely different than the confidence that comes with actual practice or actually, talking to someone and getting peer support. And so it's the same challenge for both of these aspects. And I find that really, really interesting. So how do you overcome that? You have to give them something that's really important to them. There are a group of officers that last police department that trained 12 times a year for 5.5 years before I left there. So imagine all the police officers that we have everywhere else, they train maybe once a year. So that whole group, even though they never fully embraced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, no desire to become belted, no desire to do a lot of live training, they trained once a month. So that's 12 times a year, 60, 68. Don't hit me on my math, but 60 sometimes over 5 years. That's how much training you can get. So there's your competent middle, right? And
Mm.
that was really the way in which we did it. Now, being a lady, I'm sure you're wondering, do you have any female officers? So for me, my wife was a police officer, so she's retired now. She's actually a doctor now. But she was involved in a shooting. She suffered from PTSD, and she retired from the job with disability pension, and then, over the long haul, got much, much better. But so I've always had like kind of a special, place in my at being an instructor and a leader to make sure that women officers can be successful in policing. So in the academies, all these years, I would spend extra time to make sure they're prepared for the physical skills, encourage them to put themselves out there, to find places to train. And I've did a lot of recruiting because women bring a really valuable different aspect of policing than male officers. Like they're extremely important to us. I could go on and on about whether it's community policing, dealing with victims, having a woman's kind of different mentality on the street. Like there's just so much value there. So at Lower Moreland and then here at Buckingham, I've been able to recruit some really top quality female officers. And, when I left my last place, one of them was promoted to lieutenant, and they embraced a lot of this training. I've run a lot of regional women's police officer only control tactics training seminars over the years, things like that. And so the one thing here is trying to come up with, some type of incentive, because I used to always ask them at my last organization, like, well, okay, I can't give you a beard. What can I give you that will encourage you to come to this monthly training? And, the workout on duty time helped a lot with them. And then since I came to a new agency that already had like policies in place, the policies in place at this organization are you cannot have fingernail polish and you cannot have earrings of any kind. That was the policy, the old chief when I came here. So not to miss an opportunity, we leave those policies in place. But then if they come to control tactic training, they can paint their nails or they can wear stud earrings. So I found some things that that have helped to motivate people to get a little bit outside of their comfort zone and put themselves out there. And then once they do it, a lot of people really buy into this. The value of it on the street. It helps them with their confidence and their abilities to kind of protect themselves and arrest people, which is a big part of what we have to do.
I love the thought process of thinking outside of the box to incentivize things that matter to people, because we talk about when you teach people new things, when you communicate things, you have to do it in a way that's received, right? And that's going to be the most effective. And that's not to say that you can get to everyone always, but the idea is how can you say one thing 100 different times so that everyone understands what you're saying, right? And so for you to think outside the box as far as incentivizations and say, there's all these normal things that maybe agencies or leaders are giving out for incentives, but what matters the most to the people in my organization? And for you to say, yeah, people really wanted facial hair, or the women really appreciated nail polish and stud earrings. I think that is so cool to challenge the things that have been done so that people are more motivated to do the things. And I agree with you that the first step is often the hardest, and I think there is fear, and maybe it is ego. And what I've recognized is people don't want to suck at something, and it goes both ways. So I've seen it where leadership doesn't want to feel embarrassed in front of everybody else. And then everyone else doesn't want to feel embarrassed in front of leadership, and of course their peers too. But I feel like when you're new at something, you're always gonna quote unquote suck at it, right? You never rode a bike for the first time perfectly. You fell probably 20 times before you were able to ride that bike. And as kids, I think we had kind of this durability where we were open to being new and to learning new things. And as we get older and maybe there's different pressures of positions and peer pressure, we become afraid of embarrassing ourselves in front of other people. And so for you to recognize that that first step is the hardest, and people might not do this on their own without that incentive, but also how can we create an environment that's realistic with where people are at certain times in their careers or where they are physically, so that we can set them up for success and they don't feel like it's unachievable. Then you have more success long term. So I think it's really cool.
For sure. One of the things I did early on was I took that I was thinking about it when we get to the end today. I had some thoughts about, some important thoughts to leave people with. But one of the things that is in 2014, I had the whole program. I was all excited. I did all the statistical data on how much safer we could make everyone. I did all this research. So I had all this huge thing of research and proof, and I want to roll out this program. And they were like, yeah, no, that's great, but no. So I'm like, oh, what the heck do I do with that now? Right. So right around that time period, the state, which is the Municipal Police Officers, training commission, they changed kind of their protocols where every year you have to get 12 hours of in-service mandatory training, and they usually deliver that 12 hours each year. So it's usually legal updates and then 3 other courses. Back then they started letting people pitch their own little programs that could account for some of those, so that departments weren't just stuck in that one little box. They could try to tailor trainings for people. So anyway, I took that 2014 program and I created a instructor's course in how to implement safe physical training. Mm-hmm. And so even though I couldn't apply it where I wanted to in my own organization, instead I created an instructor's course. So then what I did is I ran that locally in Bucks County, and in DTAC instructors in the region come to my that are already certified under different companies and all that. They would come to this training and I would show them how to implement their training program safely because I knew that was the resistance. Once, and that's what I'm like. I've been here a year and a half. We've had one broken toe, a middle toe, kicking a yoga ball. So I won't be able to, no more kicking soft balls anymore at my police department. But like other than that, no significant injuries. So by implementing like safe training programs, you can that's kind of like how you start spreading it around to the suburbs here outside of Philadelphia. It's finally like I could name like 7 or 8 agencies in the last year that are all implementing programs. I have another larger agency sending their instructors here now at my weekly trainings to learn how to implement it at their department. And my focus is on making people comfortable.
Yeah.
You can't make it so that it's so intense, because if you make it intense on people early on, they're done. They're never going to come back. And then the other part is just having them focus on like really good, safe training techniques. So that's kind of been part of my focus over this last period.
I think that's great. And I really appreciate the proactive preventative approach, because, and I've been saying this a lot lately, and I know it's maybe so cliche to say it, but I think it's really relevant. And I think we forget this, that if it's predictable, it's preventable, right? And so, and you guys train for all the things, you train for like, what do you do in this scenario? What do you do in that scenario? And so when we can look at physical fitness, when we can look at injury prevention, we can start to look at those numbers of what are the most common injuries in law enforcement. What are the most common things that are happening, when you are out on the streets and you're, struggling to detain someone or whatever it is that you're seeing, and we can work backwards. So, obviously the injury prevention space is my wheelhouse. And so I've done a lot of deep dive research on trying to identify, okay, what are the most common injuries and why? Why are these things happening? And then what are those resources that are going to have the highest return, And if we can implement those things proactively, then we know that we can reduce the risk of those things and we can prevent those things long term. But I think we're all still seeing that, and it's not everywhere. There are agencies just like yours all across the country that are doing these things proactively. But I still think that there is still a focus on reactive, like what are we going to do when someone's injured versus how can we prepare people to not get injured? And so it's a completely different conversation. And so I appreciate you sharing exactly how you've done it, what you've done, how you've done it, because I think some of these conversations can feel a little cotton candy, where it feels like there's not a lot of substance behind it. And I think that through this conversation, anyone who's listening has a clear understanding of how you can do something like that. And are you a resource if people want to ask you, in other states, kind of how you're able to do that? Are you willing to share that or no?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love that. Yeah.
Okay.
Anything I can do. And like I said, I had a unique experience. My wife was in residency in Texas a few years ago. That's part of the reason I made the move when I did. And so I began looking for other chiefs positions down in Texas. And don't want to offend any of my brothers and sisters from Texas, but Dallas, Fort Worth, the temperatures, the different environment than up here in Pennsylvania. My wife didn't fall in love with that part of the country. So I became a finalist several times while I was down there, very close to being hired with a number of agencies there. And then my wife came to me and she was like, I think I want to stay in Pennsylvania. So I had to do the like timeout and then refocus my attention up here. But while I was down there, like Grand Prairie PD outside of Fort Worth, I met through jiu-jitsu. I met the deputy chief there who had a daily jiu-jitsu program. So like it's a larger agency. It was like 400 officers. And so they would have like 30 cops every day at this class. So every time I flew in to visit my family, I would train with them a couple days a week. And so him and I tried to write a program. We tried to write a program to sell this to the International Association of Chiefs of Police for their next, they do this conference every year, the IACP. And we tried to push that through, and we were going to teach leaders how to implement programs because the data is indisputable. So Marietta, Georgia, Grand Prairie both have big data sets. So like that's my only challenge is being a small, well, technically in Pennsylvania, once you hit 20 officers, you're mid-sized. But comparatively, like Texas, every department is like 100 officers.
Right.
So it's pretty interesting. So it's hard for me to get, like, I can get you tons of anecdotal evidence. I could go on and on for hours about how my program has helped my officers be safer and use force better. But then when you get to an agency the size of Marietta, Georgia, Grand Prairie, they have like huge data sets of like 25% reductions in injuries to officers and defendants. It's wild, the amount of data. And, anecdotally, a place like mine, within 6 months, I have video of my officers employing our techniques here, and they had never trained any of this stuff before, implementing it here on the street. And then at my last place, I had officers come to me that one had worked in Philadelphia, so he was used to the more rough and tumble version of control tactics. And I remember, I'll never forget, we had 4 officers that had to arrest a person who was a very large man who was in a mental health episode. And he came up to me and he was like, "Oh, Chief, the other day we were on that job." He's like, "I ran up and I grabbed the guy's arm, and so-and-so had his legs, and another person had the other arm, just like you taught us." He said, "I started to pull my taser out. And then I remember what you keep saying to us, like, if we all have a limb, like, we're all safe." So he's like, I left my taser in the holster. We took him down safely, easily got him into custody, just employing the techniques. And I've had that same exact thing happen multiple times just in a year and a half here. So it's I think the key is to prove it, and we can definitely prove it now. It's just now getting the leadership across the country to buy into it and really push the agenda.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing exactly what you've done. And, I know we're kind of button up on time. And so I feel like everything that we've talked about has been kind of a progression, but the theme of it is really proactive, preventative. And I know we talked about this a little bit earlier. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but my last question is for the younger generation who are entering into this career today. What words of wisdom would you share with them that could help set them up for success in their career?
Well, I'll look at it from 2 ways. The first part is personally. So in their own person, like, they need to stay healthy. They need to do things, develop habits from earliest in their career that, I often, when I teach police officers in the academies and even the mandatory monthly trainings that we get, I often talk about that backpack that we carry. So, the way I look at it, police officers carry this backpack, and throughout your career, you're going to deal with things and you're going to see things that are going to stay with you. I don't care where it's at. I don't care if it's a rural little PD or if it's a, big city PD. It's just maybe the amount of stuff that goes in and out of your backpack might be slightly different. But at the end of the day, whether it's, being on suicides, horrible crashes, lethal force situations, all those different things that we see, it takes a toll. And I always, I can list a bunch of things in my career and I can remember putting them in my backpack. So the way I've always approached fitness ever since the early 90s, when I, got through my divorce and stuff and realized how important health and fitness was, I would focus on whether it was, a lot of times for me, it was exercise would help me, running hours and doing those things to burn off the stress of the job. The other part is having, a good partner to talk to, not being afraid to share look for peers that are willing to talk. Like, there's so much out there now compared to when I started 30 some years ago. So like, put in place the skill set or the tools that you need to keep yourself well. So that's the one thing is like, put those things in place and make sure that you do them. So like for me, it was always, my wife would always get mad at me. She could tell when, I would need to exercise and I would be like getting annoyed or short with her. And she'd be like, oh, you didn't exercise today, and she's like, you need to like go do that, because that was my way of processing the stress of the job. So find those things. And then the second part is kind of what we talked about, which is, there will be things in your career where a door that you maybe had your eye on for a long time gets shut. And you think like that's the pathway you're supposed to take, and it's just like that fitness program or the DTAC program. Like when that got closed on me, well, I turned it into an instructor's course that I shared with all these people. When I was up for a promotion earlier in my career, and I didn't get the promotion, and I was kind of like stuck as a patrol supervisor on the street, like mid to the late part of my career. I said to myself, like I may be pushing around a police car for the next 15 years. Am I okay with that? So for me, I said, oh, what will allow me to keep my passion? That's when I started teaching the police academy. So no matter what, whenever you sense a door closes where you think that was supposed to be your pathway, that's when I want you to focus on saying, okay, where's the next door? And for me, it's faith. My faith always told me that when one door closes, God is going to open a second one for me. And that's been true in my life. So, but whatever your place is in that, whether it's a person of faith or not, just understand that when one thing closes, you just got to start seeking that next pathway, to get you to that better place, that happier place, that fulfilling place that you seek for your life, whatever that is, whatever that may be. So that would be the two nuggets of advice or words of the wise I would provide.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate you coming on here with me today.
Thank you.